Hello, everyone. So we're tuning in from Hobart in our little shop that sits in our driveway in our little suburban block just outside of Hobart. And so today, we're talking about principles for waste-free living and contrasting that with the kind of hack approach. As Emily mentioned, on social media, whether it's Pinterest or Instagram or Facebook, you know, there's thousands of posts that will kind of tell you, you know, this is a quick, easy solution, an easy trick to deal with this particular waste issue. And we've kind of found that some waste-free hacks don't work for everyone. Most hacks don't work for everyone. Most hacks work for some people in some circumstances, and at other times they don't work at all. So we're questioning whether it's useful to rely on hacks if you want to try and live a relatively waste-free way. So what we want to talk about today is having some principles that can guide you so that you can kind of be living in a way that's in the waste-free or the zero-waste ballpark, rather than just being overwhelmed, really, by
so much information.
It's information overwhelm. If you spend any time on social media, there's just so much coming in about what to do in the zero waste space, and it can be quite it can feel like it's an insurmountable thing to achieve if you're seeing thousands of different hacks. So we reckon it's good to have a conversation about the principles that you might be guided by, instead of feeling daunted by all of the thousands of hacks that are out there. So when we're talking about principles, so Lauren and I came into waste-free living from a permaculture background. So we both studied permaculture in the few years before trying to live waste-free back in 2015. And permaculture, for those of you who don't know, has kind of a structure to it, in that there's like 3 high-level ethics that kind of are the overarching ways of thinking. And so it's like people care, earth care, people care, fair share are like these 3 ethics. And then nestled underneath those are 12 or 10, depending on whose information you look at, kind of guiding principles. And we found that we really related to those principles.
Yeah.
One of the principles of permaculture is specifically relating to waste, and it's called produce no waste. And we've really hooked onto that one principle. We found that it pulled in all of the other permaculture principles. But having a principles-based kind of intention into this way of living has made it a lot easier for us to do what we do. So, and also having principles can mean that it's something that is able to be adopted by a larger section of the population. So at the moment, I think it would be hard to argue that only a small fraction argue against that only a small fraction of people are really trying to live waste-free. Most of the population is not. A lot of the population probably has care for the environment, does a few things, but not necessarily really pushing to not make any waste. And that may be because of the daunting nature of having thousands of hacks. It may be due to lack of information. It may be due to other influences that are stronger in their lives. But I think that if more of us in the zero waste community kind of identified the principles or the values that we're really underpinned by when we're trying to live waste-free, then it might be something that can be more broadly adopted by the population. Principles don't have to be really high level and broad, they can be really specific. And a broad principle will be useful in a particular type of situation, and a specific principle might be useful in a different type of situation. But when we think about zero waste, the most obvious kind of principles that I think people have used are the 5 R's, which kind of were originally the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle. But the 5 R's are refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and rot. And those can be seen as, or framed as, principles, really. So with those 5 principles, the reuse, recycle, and rot are really kind of actions rather than principles, things you can do to manage your waste. So you've brought something home, you've got some waste as a result of that, whatever it is, and then you've got to manage it. So those reuse, recycle, and rot are kind of ways to manage your waste. The top 2 R's, the refuse and reduce, are kind of waste avoidance strategies, and they're seen as the most effective ways to not make waste. That's why they're at the top of the 5 R's. And we think that there are some ways of kind of unpacking. I don't like using the jargon unpacking, but thinking more deeply about refusing and reducing as principles. So one of them for us has been to simplify. And simplifying for us means lots of things. It can mean, something like if you've looked into trying to not make waste, and you find that the only way to do it is to go to 8 different shops, and you're finding that you're driving your car a lot more just to get to those extra shops to get things to theoretically make less waste, probably less packaging waste. So for us, if we're trying to simplify, we might look at a way that we can go to fewer shops. It might mean foregoing something, so refusing something. That's how it relates to refuse, or having less of something so we don't have to go to a particular shop as often. Or it could be about combining it with other trips, so that we're just making our routine simpler. So that kind of segues to the other.
But there's also simplifying, like, for example, the food that you eat. So choosing simpler meals, so you're not cooking gourmet MasterChef meals every night, particularly if you've got a family. And you're out the door all the time, taking kids everywhere. There just might not be enough time to plan all of that in and make sure you've got every ingredient. So keeping it super simple. I think we have maybe about 12 to 14 different variations of food recipes that we eat sort of on a fortnightly to monthly rotation.
Like for dinner.
Some of them are faves that we have a bit more regularly, like pasta, that I know all the kids are going to eat. But keeping it to those simple choices where there's just you're going to be reducing waste because they're going to eat everything. And using fewer ingredients, so less of the fancy stuff.
Save the fancy
Save that for good occasions, special occasions and things like that. Yeah.
So I guess, so the other thing that is a principle is around creating routines and rhythms. So we want waste-free living to be something that's easy for everyone. It shouldn't be a big chore and a burden and something that takes so much mental strain that you can't fathom it. if you have more routines in your day in terms of the places that you go to get your waste-free products, if you're getting waste-free food, sorry, package-free food, so it could be around transport, it could be about, it could be around the routines of when you do things in your day, but also you might ask yourself, okay, have I got my keys, my wallet, my hanky, my cloth bags, and my drink bottle? So it's just slightly kind of ramping up what would have been a previous habit of have I got my keys and my wallet and my hanky maybe, and you're just like adding a little bit more onto it. So you're kind of co-opting onto what is already a routine in your life and just making it a bit more. And once you do that a few times, it does become routine, and then you don't have to make those conscious decisions about it, and it all gets a lot easier. We don't really think about living how we are living waste-free. We don't think about that on a daily basis. In fact, when we get asked to give a talk about waste-free living, we have to go, oh, is that what we do? And we have to think, like, what do we do that's different to what other people do? Because it just feels like our normal. It doesn't feel like it's anything exciting, or like we don't even recognise the distinction anymore because we're just doing it. It's getting a bit dark in here. Managed to catch us when the sun's going down behind the hills at 4:15 in June. Oh, that's really intense. All right. So the other thing is, like, if you want to, we've found it really handy because one of our still ongoing waste challenges is around transport. We don't have a fancy electric car, although it'd be nice to have one. We've still got our really old Corolla. And so trying to limit the number of trips that we do out has been like a conscious thing that we're doing to create a routine of, if we take our kid to a class, we'll try and do the food shopping at the same time. So that means that you're not doing a dedicated trip for every single thing that you need to do, shopping less often.
And it happens on the same day each week, so you don't have to think about it. It just happens.
Or maybe it's as simple as like looking at your own week and working out which days of the week you have the most time available. So maybe on the weekend you've got a bit more time, and you might want to have a cook up so that you've got your meals prepped for the rest of the week. And then when you've got really busy nights during the week, you don't have to stress about trying to find some waste-free dinner because you'll have already prepared it on the weekend. So because you can do music and cook and do that sort of thing, and it makes life a little bit easier.
You've incorporated sourdough bread into your routine.
Yeah, it helps me to get up from my desk when I'm working, you know, because I would tend to, I have a mostly computer-based job, but yeah, I would tend to sit there for hours on end. But having bread means that I have to get up every hour and a half and spend a couple of minutes like folding the dough or kneading it or putting it in the oven or whatever. And it's just a little routine that we have every couple of days, and we're getting fresh bread, which is, you know, like as good as you can get. So yeah, little routines like that are awesome.
Then there's the bigger routines too, like the seasonal rhythms, and we try to be guided by them through our year. So things like little rituals like planting out the garlic on Easter Sunday is usually something I'll do after a big historic hunt's happened. And then I know that by Christmas we'll have beautiful garlic to eat. And so that's a nice little rhythm. And then there's foraging that happens in the autumn. I mean, we are always foraging, but mostly in the autumn. there's preserving that happens every year. And so, you know, to make just a little time for those little rhythms and routines. And then year by year, you get better at it. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff a few years ago.
So the principle of developing
some
some routines like that and having the intention to try and develop good routines is like, it's a really positive thing, because then you start looking forward to those times of the year and those activities, and it makes waste-free living a more enriching thing.
Yeah.
Overall, it becomes part of like the activities that we do, like foraging and preserving, and they become our entertainment.
Yeah.
They're fun things to do.
Yeah, it brings you sort of a bit more in line with nature and what's going on there too, which reminds you why you're doing it in the first place.
Yeah. If you saw Meg and Patrick speak earlier, they were referring to the importance of being connected with nature, and that's something that we've always pushed. That if you don't have that connection with nature, then you kind of don't really see the point of any of this. And recognizing your role as part of nature is vital. So maybe that's a principle, maybe that's just implied and you know it. So it kind of just whatever works for you. I'm conscious of the time. There's a bunch of other principles that we've talked about in our book, which is a family guide to waste-free living. There it is backwards, which is still in the shops and stuff. But a couple of them that I wanted to mention were to be flexible, a principle of being flexible. And I don't mean in a kind of a yogic way, but I mean in terms of one-for-one substitutions. So we hear a lot of people who are trying to reduce waste feel like they hit a wall when they can't find that substitution for their rice crackers or for their favourite, like, I don't know, sauce or whatever it is that they just can't get.
Or it's costed a little more.
Yeah, or the cost of something. There's like a barrier.
Yeah.
So for us, waste-free living is about not necessarily finding the one-for-one substitution of how we lived before, but recognising some things. We will apply the 5 R's and we'll refuse and reduce, or we'll just, we'll go without for a while and then we'll find a solution. So being flexible is part of it. Another principle is to grow what food you can. So and try and source local food if you can. I mean, growing your own food is the most local that you can get. Not everyone has access to land. So if you can join a community garden and grow food that way, then that's awesome. But you can grow food in pots on your kitchen bench if you want, herbs and that sort of thing. So a principle to try and grow what you can and get food as locally as possible is a principle that is useful, I think, as part of waste-free living. Another principle is to strike up conversations with local independent retailers and businesses and local councillors and local zero waste groups, because community and having conversations about waste and reducing it are necessary for it to be easier for all of us to be able to do it. We kind of have felt like we were on our own doing it here for a long time, and it's been really awesome to have conversations with local businesses and normalise some of the practices around reducing waste. That's going to make it easier for everyone. And another principle that I think we've applied since the start is to take responsibility for our own waste, personal responsibility. So we've sort of decided that anything that we bring onto our little suburban block into our home, we're going to try and take responsibility for that waste. We're not going to leave it up to the garbage truck taker or awayer.
Well, we also
or the landfill site.
because we're putting trust in, particularly with recycling, putting trust in everyone else in the neighbourhood to have done that right, so that it's not contaminated. So if we take personal responsibility of that, then we're not pushing the responsibility on everyone else. And that could go on when we talk about recycling too, with it being sent overseas. And
sorry, I'm just looking.
Can I answer some?
I don't think we have any questions yet. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions. see if there's any that are urgent. I don't think there is yet. We'll hold on. So the other thing, we're not going to have time to do it all, right?
I reckon this one.
Yes. So we've rattled off a bunch of different principles that you could adopt, but it can get pretty daunting if you've got all these principles rolling around in your head when you're trying not to make waste.
Yeah.
We've really
which is where you were at with all the hacks.
Which is where I was at with all the hacks. So it's starting to sound like I'm talking shit. But my point is that we've really only adopted one conscious principle from the start. And that principle is to avoid waste where possible, which is effectively the permaculture principle of produce no waste. So we kind of reframed the idea of avoiding waste where possible into a question that we ask with every decision that we make in our lives. So what is the least wasteful option that we can apply here? So if you had a scenario of, you get up in the morning, that's a fairly common scenario, and you're like, what's the least wasteful option that I have for breakfast? And you go to the kitchen and there's you've got shelves full of packeted cereals, and you're like, well, that's not very low waste. So it's prompting you to think about and reflect on your situation with breakfast. And you might go, well, if I can get bread from the bakery around the corner and I use the eggs from my chooks or that I barter locally, then I'm going to have effectively a zero waste brekkie. But at the moment, I don't have it. So you eat your cereal, savour it, enjoy it, because you're probably not going to buy it again, use it up, and then you've identified the alternative solution for reducing the waste. So that's just based on one principle. And the same principle of what is the least wasteful option that I have can be applied throughout the day. It can be applied when you're catching transport to work. The car is a bit wasty. I could catch the bus, I could ride a bike, I could walk, I could carpool. What are your options? It's going to be different for everyone. So a hack approach of being prescriptive is not going to work, but having a principle that's like asking yourself a question of what's the least wasteful option that I have, then that's going to allow you to problem solve. And problem solving is a big part of this, and being creative. And it just allows you to get into that headspace of working out what's going to be the least wasteful option for you. So if you do that over and over, it might be in the first couple of weeks, you're asking yourself that same question a number of times in a day. But after a couple of weeks, you won't. It'll dissolve. That question asking will dissolve because you'll have identified the solutions for most of your day-to-day kind of habits and actions. And it'll only come up every now and again when you face something new, like a big white good appliance carks it, and you need to work out what you're going to do about that. Then you can ask, what is the least wasteful option? Sorry, I'm seeing Costa's writing a question. Okay, I'll read it. Do you mind if I read out Costa's question?
Yeah.
All right, we'll just go off track a tiny bit. Costa's asked, what's one method or technique you can share with people that helps to open up conversations when they may be in an environment where it's challenging to get people, even family members, starting to think differently or at least open up? Or do you prefer to focus on being the billboard and having the questions come your way? Well, I think you kind of answered it a little bit in the question, but we would, I think leading by example, by just doing it, you just say, well, I've made this decision for me, or we've made this decision as a family. So our family has made a commitment and a pact to try and avoid waste.
It's usually sharing that principle, isn't it? That overarching principle. This is how we're living now.
So being able to communicate with people who aren't on board or aren't aware of waste-free living, if you can communicate them through by conveying your principles, I reckon it's likely to get more of a positive response and reception than if you just say, I saw on Pinterest this hot new hack that I'm going to apply here, and so you better get on board because that's what they're doing on Pinterest. That's not going to work.
But you might just live by example, or you might start giving gifts that are low waste, or you might, like when we visited my sister and we gave them a compost bin and set it up for them and fix their other one, and
then we gave them a compost stirrer.
Yeah. So now they're able to, they get composting.
Yeah.
So it's leading by example and not really pushing those views onto people. And,
it's not pushing the views on them to give them compost bins.
Yeah. No.
It's just like we could see a need and we helped fill a need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, we needed to use the compost
because we were there on holidays. Yeah, we wanted to use their compost bin. Yeah. I hope that helps, Costa. Just I guess gentle conversations. We're not good at pushing what we do onto others. So if we go to a social gathering, which we haven't been to one for many months, and nor I can't remember what they're like, but we just sort of do our thing. And if there's like a really wasty spread of food, then we might decide to just opt out of it. You know, we don't start standing there lecturing people about the Tim Tams and be like,
so before we come off, and everyone make sure that they don't bring any plastic, because we'll be really offended by that. We don't really push that on people.
But people know. People quickly learn about what you're about, though. If they're people that you know, they know what you're on about. They might ask questions, and that's totally awesome.
And most of the time, people are really onto it, and they get it. And really helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, Costa. We'll just continue on a little bit. What's the time? All right, we'll give it a few more mins. I wanted to mention that asking this question of like what is the least wasteful option makes it sound like we're kind of operating in a vacuum. Of course, there are lots of other factors and lots of other considerations that we make when we're making decisions in our lives. And when it comes to buying products, we're having to also think about the treatment of workers and the conditions of the people that produce the product that you've made, the distance travelled, any other ethical considerations. So, like, I'm not saying to try and to ignore those. Sometimes you do have to weigh things up, and sometimes the answer is not particularly straightforward. So, do I take the packaged ethical product or the package free slightly unethical product? Like, it's not always like a prescriptive this is the answer, but having the question of I'm going to look for the least wasteful, and now you've got to like a sticking point where you might want to engage your zero waste community or your friends and have a conversation around this sort of stuff.
We'll just keep going.
I won't get distracted by questions. Sorry, don't look. And sometimes you come up against a situation in your day where there doesn't seem to be any waste-free options. Everything that you can see looks like it's going to produce a lot of waste. And there are particular areas where that happens, especially medical, veterinary, pharmaceutical, disability-related stuff. Sometimes work, and if your kids go to school and there's processes outside of your control, that can be really hard because you're removed from some of the decision making. But even where you are the decision maker and all of the options are a bit wasty, then don't stress. Put your efforts into areas of your life where you can make waste-free decisions and do those and go for those. And if you've come up against something, say it's medicines that have like a blister pack and there's no alternative, we don't think that it's up to the person taking that medicine, the potentially sick person, to fight the system and create that change. It's definitely up to people such as zero waste communities and local governments and all kinds of spokespeople to be able to find new ways of doing things with less waste or changing the systems altogether.
So sharing your principles with them, or aligning with people who share your principles, and then communicating that with the businesses and councils. And
especially if it's a wasteful issue that you're going to come up against time and time again. Then it's about opening that up to the community and seeing if that can be dealt with at a broader level, because it's likely that you're not the only one facing that waste dilemma. But I will harp on again about the power of the Zero Waste community. Zero Waste Victoria, which is running this festival, have great social media pages. If you have a question about a particular issue in your life, that's the space where you can ask for the hack. You know, so you've come in being underpinned and supported by principles, or even one principle of avoid waste where possible, and then you've identified that little spot in your life where you don't know what to do about batteries, or you don't know what to do about this particular product or type of packaging, and then the Zero Waste communities are awesome at being a hive mind that can support you. We have run Zero Waste Tasmania for nearly 5 years, and it's now a place where you can pose your problems, and there'll inevitably be half a dozen people who will have answers for you very quickly. Yeah. But I just wanted to finish on, well, firstly, as participants in listening to this talk, you don't have to by any way adopt any of the principles that we've suggested, but I would suggest that you reflect on your own life, identify if there's one or more principles that you'd like to be working with or supported by, and make a commitment to them. You know, make a commitment.
The people you share the house with,
yeah,
living with people,
that's going to help.
Do it together.
We didn't just do it; we got the kids, and we all chatted about it. And it's like, this is what we're going to do. And so it's been all in from the start, which has made it much easier for our family to do. And then the last point, unless you want to say something else, was around climate change. So the language and the context of a lot of what we're doing has been moving towards being about climate change, which is kind of what we did it from the start for anyway, being conscious of the impacts that we are having as humans on the planet. And it seems like on a daily basis there are new news stories coming in that are telling us about the rapid rate at which climate change impacts are happening. And so if we stick to a hacks-based approach, and we try to incrementally just like do every little single thing over the span of many years, it's actually not going to be fast enough. If the population 20 years later, you're like, oh, I think I'm zero waste now. It's been 20 years of Pinterest hacks and I'm there. We actually think that if you try to hit the nail on the head with a good solid principle or two behind you, and look at it from a creative problem-solving point of view, that you'll actually be able to eliminate a huge amount of waste in your own life in the space of weeks. And then you'll find that life gets much easier around those decisions, and that there are support networks around you to help you where you get stuck.
Yeah.
And thank you. Thank you from us, and we would love to answer questions. Let me click on the chat. I don't know, Emily, if you want to bring people in.
So what we might do is if people want to type out their questions, or even they might want to share some of the principles now that they've had a chance to learn about this. So it will show up in the chat. If you'd like me to read it, I can read it and you can answer it, or if you'd
I don't want to play favourites, so maybe you can tell us which one to look at.
No worries. So looking at, we've got someone who was asking, we know you've got a lot on between your home business, your home education, homemade living, and they're of a very similar sort of space. So this is Eliza, and she's wondering, what do you do when you're tired, ill, and overwhelmed, particularly around food?
That's a really good question. We've had time.
We just took a week off.
We just took a week off because we were tired and overwhelmed and burnt out and exhausted. So we're feeling better now.
What did we do? We grabbed a few things out of the freezer and cut some broccoli from the garden and just went.
We just went. But we went somewhere where we knew there was a bulk food store nearby.
Yeah.
But there was a little bit of planning involved, and we took a bucket to put our own scraps in. So we were going to bring our compost home, but they had a compost bin there, so we managed to use that. I
think what Emily's wanting to know is when you've
just got nothing left in the tank.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
I try and have a few meals in the freezer for when I just can't do anything. That's it. I'm exhausted. We've had a really big week, so there's something there that we can have.
Remember a couple of years ago when we all got the flu?
We had flu for 6 weeks, and we had a book deadline.
Yeah, we had to finish submitting our manuscript for our book.
That was tough.
And we were all sick, and we managed to still do it. How did we do it? It was because you had some food prepped.
Yeah.
That was a big part of it.
Because everything is helpful, so you always have some fruit in the cupboard.
Ideally, we would have a community of friends and family. Like, we're fairly isolated here, but we'd have more people that would come and drop off meals if they knew you were all sick.
My family are all in Melbourne, so they're not around to help out. So we do have times where we feel completely on our own. And yeah, just trying to prepare for those times ahead if we can.
Tough times are ahead.
We've had breakfast for dinner more times than I care to think. And the kids are okay with that.
Yeah, they all live. It's fine. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, we've got definitely a few more.
Some suggestions there. That's great.
Yeah, so Raylene gave some suggestions: freezing meal, foraging in the garden.
Yeah.
When I was a carer in the garden, went wild and ended up being able to forage and had plenty of seeds to collect as well.
Yeah.
Where were the hacks?
We didn't talk about the hacks.
So we didn't talk about the hacks, but a hack could be something that we like. It could be something that we apply. Like going to a bulk food store could be seen as a zero waste hack, but not everyone has access to a bulk food store. So that particular action, or if you want to call it a hack or a solution or whatever, it doesn't apply to everyone. Whereas if you say, I'm going to try and find a solution for getting my groceries without packaging, then you've reframed it into a principle so that you find what works for you in your situation.
So it might be just buy a really large quantity of something and deal with the packaging yourself rather than letting the bulk food shop deal with that and storing it somewhere, if you can afford to do that.
Yeah, or starting a food co-op or joining a food co-op or bartering or borrowing or getting into your farmers markets. There's lots of other solutions, but it's not prescriptive if you have a principle, whereas the problem with the hacks is that they're very specific and prescriptive and they don't apply to everyone. Yeah, I mean, they're useful as an endpoint, but they shouldn't. We don't think they should drive you. Yeah.
Wonderful. We've got Meg Farmer. It's great. Wondering tips for living waste-free when traveling or going on a holiday when where you can't fall back on your routines and you don't have your usual resources.
Yeah.
One of our favourite things to do is research a little bit beforehand, and if there are any bulk food shops or community compost situations or little farmers markets and things like that that we can find to be part of, that sometimes will guide where we choose to go. Often we'll be eating more fresh fruit and veggies if we can, so we're avoiding needing packeted foods. That's kind of our main thing that we do.
We're also pretty strongly committed to not flying or flying less, so kind of after taking a couple of trips last year to go interstate, ironically to give zero waste to festivals such as this one, we kind of thought, well, it's getting harder and harder to justify flying anywhere. So like this little holiday of having a week off, we just kept it in Tassie. I mean, everyone's keeping it within their state at the moment, but we were intending to do that anyway at the start of the year before the pandemic. We weren't intending to go interstate unless it's like an absolute need, and like a recreational holiday. I don't think we need to go interstate. I think we can get what we need in Tassie. Yeah. People come here.
We found somewhere we hadn't been.
Yeah, we went to a part of Tassie we hadn't been before, so it was nice. But yeah, a little bit of planning goes a long way with holidays, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit of planning beforehand. Although it's
pretty spontaneous. It was 2 hours before we
left 2 hours after we decided to go.
Yeah.
So I guess the planning in that case was making some food and freezing it a couple of weeks earlier. So we threw that in our box of food, and I ran out and grabbed some things from the garden, and we took some bags because we knew we'd find a bakery on the way, and so we bought some bread. And
it dictated what food we ate.
And there we were.
Yeah.
It was simpler eating for that week.
Yeah.
Everyone was okay with it.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you. Costa's also added in that he jumps into using share waste when he's travelling, so he can tap into a local host that can take the compost as well. Which is
good one.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
Last year we were in, was it
Ballarat?
Ballarat?
The street. What's the is it something? What's it called? The Ballarat Street Free Street. Oh, I can't remember. Costa will know the name of it. It's got like the compost base and free seeds and yeah.
I can't believe we forgot.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a really good place in Ballarat.
Costa's written food is free.
Free laneway. That's it. See, I knew he'd know. He's got a better memory. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great it's a great model. You know, to use a marginal space like a laneway and filling it with ways to share and barter, and it brings community together, and
we get so excited when we're traveling. If we find somewhere like that, it's so great to see those resources in different places, and then we think, oh well, how can we do that here? Or just to see it out in different communities is really exciting.
We've got a question from Karina about do you have any advice? They don't live near a bulk food supplier. Are there other options that you recommend, and have there been any hiccups that you've kind of commonly come across?
So hiccups for people who don't have a bulk food supply?
I think just first question is around options, and then the second one is like I guess troubleshooting maybe for common issues you might come across.
Yeah, I guess we kind of mentioned the alternatives to bulk food a little bit before.
Yeah.
So having a food co-op, growing as much of your own food, that takes time. If you've got land, plant your fruit trees, get them in early, and then we're now growing. We grew all of our fruit and veg just about through the last 6 months.
Yeah. And
we're just on a suburban block, and we don't even garden for hours every day. It's like minimal. We're kind of pretty minimal gardeners. But yeah, like finding out what resources are local to you. So people who live rurally might need to start thinking about a food co-op type situation. There's a great one on Bruny Island in Tasmania. They have a great model. They're a fairly remote regional community, and they've got this food co-op where they just have a small community space where they can store their kind of big buckets of dry goods and so forth. And there's just a few people who are working volunteer level together to administer that.
And it means that if there is something that happens where the island's isolated, they've got a storage of food there for the community to access,
which could work really well during future pandemics. You know, I think you know, it's not about prepping so much as just being locally resilient as a community. Not being so super dependent on a couple of major supermarkets meeting all of everyone's food needs. It's about finding ways that we can help meet our own needs. There's probably more solutions in our book for that one.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Alternatives to bulk food shopping. Yeah.
Excellent. It's like, check out the book.
Check out the book. Or Erin's book, whoever's, you know, we all talk about the same sort of things.
Kirsty's asked about how involved are your daughters. Kids can ultimately can be the ultimate challenge. They can also be the driving force behind a zero waste journey, especially when it's new. So she'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, when we started, our kids were like 5, 9, and 12, 13 or something, roughly.
Maze was 4.
Okay. Yeah. So now they're like 9, 13, and 16. So they're a little bit older, obviously, 5 years older than they were. But our kids are home educated and have been the whole time. So that's kind of meant that we're home with them every day. We're doing all the meals. That's like, if you want to eat, there's a kitchen, go for it. And they don't have the same peer pressure of a school group, but they still have home ed groups.
Oh, and they go to like ballet and
drama
and things like that. And there's always people having bubble tea or whatever stuff they're having, and they want to get involved in that.
But they've become
So he's there, but
pretty staunch supporters.
they've always been really committed from day one, because we sat down and talked about the reasons why we were doing it, our principles for doing it, and they completely agreed. We spend and always have spent a lot of time in nature, going to rainforests and things like that, so they can see waste processes in nature. They understand how that works. They could see how we were making waste. We did a 2-week challenge where we did a week-long waste audit, and that seeing the effect of that, they were pretty stunned by how much waste we made.
Laying it out on the
laying
ground.
it all out, getting in amongst it and seeing it there. That was pretty impressive for them.
And motivational.
Yeah, and they were really into the idea of doing it for the 2 weeks to begin with. And then afterwards, I think because it was a bit of a game, really, like all of the problem solving as we went and answering that question, what's the least wasteful option, they kind of found it fun, and we were finding it fun. So by the end of that 2 weeks, they were really committed, and they couldn't imagine making waste, and they get pretty outspoken about it with their friends, and they often come up with solutions. So they'll turn up to drama class with a compost bucket. I think our eldest daughter got a round of applause for that. So really appreciative that she'd done that, because they hadn't considered it before.
Common pinpoints around like snacks and lollies and stuff like that kids love. You just go into your bulk food store and say, okay, kids, just choose what you want, and they'll find snacks and sweet food and stuff.
Get them involved in making something yummy.
Yeah.
Our 13-year-old is really into baking, and she's, if anyone's hungry, she's like, I'll make some brownies. It's okay, everyone.
Taste and stuff.
So they take that on, and they're really motivated.
And buying stuff, like if there's a particular toy they want, they'll look for it secondhand, things like that.
Yeah,
like,
that's always their first option. They
professional op shoppers
are aware of climate change, and they are obviously a little worried about it, but doing this stuff makes them feel good and proactive, and like they're able to have some sort of say in what happens for the world they're going to be living in. So
if they know they're doing what they can.
And if they have to choose between a world full of waste or one where there's less, they'll always choose less. So
And we've got a couple of questions around costs. Interested to hear about the challenges with increased costs. Ashley wrote after another Kirsty was saying, does anyone else find packaging free life expensive, and how do you work around that? Raylene has said that grown food is cheaper, saving seeds and swapping. Is there anything else that you can think of around the cost factor?
I mean, it's probably a talk in itself to really get into this.
It's a book in itself.
It's a book in itself. But well, just as a couple of dot point comments, we spent the same amount on food before going waste free as after. Like it hasn't become more expensive, and that's partly because we're saying no to a bunch of foods that we were eating before. We're having less of a bunch of foods that we were having before, and we've simplified. That principle of simplify. We've simplified our diet, so there's a whole bunch of things in all of those centre aisles of the supermarket, that kind of frivolous, spontaneous snack buying we're not doing. We're making more stuff from scratch than we used to. So all of our cordials, all of our jams, all of our sauces, bread. It sounds like a lot of work and chore, but it's kind of like, well, I love baking bread, but it's
interspersed. It's like, it's not like we get up in the morning and we do all of those things in a day. It's like once a month I might make some cordial.
But that will make it cheaper. And like not buying toothpaste, but making it out of bicarb and a few other ingredients is like ends up
So
being heaps
cheap.
cheaper.
Yeah.
So I think that simplifying ends up being the big cost-effective thing.
Yeah.
Principle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just like the super short version. Is there anything else? I mean, growing a lot of our own food makes it heaps cheaper.
Yeah,
the more you can grow
growing
your own, especially like
Yeah.
fruit and garlic, gets expensive. But if you just chuck in 100 bulbs, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest one was probably milk. We were consuming a lot of milk. We've reduced that significantly so that we can afford to buy the top-notch glass bottle, returnable bottle stuff.
Also the purchasing of non-food items. So we're not buying, we buy almost nothing new.
Everything is second
Almost everything is like Tip Shop, which is an institution in Tasmania of having a shop next to your landfill site, which is awesome, and secondhand stores. And you just kind of got to go to them semi-regularly to get the good stuff that works for you, that meets your needs, and don't become a shopping addict at Vinnie's. But I think we've saved heaps of money by not having the option of just going and buying new stuff all the time, because it goes against our principles.
Just don't buy a lot.
Definitely. We've also had some people, someone, Shivani, who was mentioning about Olio, an app. You can, the free platform for exchanging food and non-food items. So apps and things like that, groups, Facebook groups, Buy Nothing groups, next door app. So lots of places where you can kind of jump on to connect with local community.
We have a good karma network in our local neighbourhood, and that's been just terrific. Yeah, we have a little food swap store just out the front of our house, and I was on there just before telling people that someone's dropped off a heap of bread, come and get it. It's really great. It just keeps that stuff free and in the community, and people looking after each other.
It encourages people to think of other options besides the main norms of supermarkets and all of those systems that we think are the default and the only option. It's encouraging people to think about other ways of doing and other ways of being.
Yeah, really around like sharing economy and things like that.
Yeah, totally.
We've also had Costa and Sylvia talking about crop swaps, so swapping excess food from your garden. And Raylene's also mentioned about learning about edible weeds, bush tucker, permaculture.
So I did mention permaculture. That's obviously underpins a lot of what we do, and a reason that we don't spend a lot of time in the garden is because we've designed it well so that it's pretty efficient, kind of that ticks away a lot.
But there are a lot of free foods that are growing in your garden or in your neighbourhood, and you can, one of my favourite things to do is walk around the neighbourhood with a basket and see just how much food I can get, and then what I can do with that.
Like making salt from the ocean, and like there's heaps of things that are out there. There's also the Fallen Fruit website, which has fruit trees and stuff. It's sometimes out of date, but it's worth checking out. It's called Falling Fruit. I think it's fallingfruit.org, where people have just like geotagged where public fruit trees are. But walk your neighbourhood and find out. Sometimes you'll spot a fruit tree in someone's front yard and all the fruit is on the ground. You might find that not everyone wants the fruit that they're growing.
So knock on the door and say, if I make you some jam, can I have your fruit?
Support your neighbourhood that way,
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely knocked on someone's door about olives, because I saw that they were just like chopping it all down, and I was like, the olives, like, what are you going to do with it? They're like, oh, we're too old, we can't do it anymore. I'm like, I'm happy to help.
And we're big supporters of growing food in public places. I'm sure Costa's talked about it for years, but growing it on your verge and in the disused public spaces, public open spaces, there's just, I mean, kids should be able to walk to school or walk out in the community and just pick fruit, have fruit dripping from the trees. That's kind of the future that we'd like to see, so that there's no shortage and we don't feel like we have to rely on the same old systems.
One last question with from Karina. Are there any rules that you've come across regarding swapping food? So things like,
rules.
I guess
Food handling and safety.
Regulations and Yeah, food handling.
Nah, not really. I mean, in the time of Corona, then we've had to be a bit more strict about things, and we've been pretty clear. Like we had that share and swap stall in our front yard all through the pandemic, and we were clear about, you know, making sure that you washed your hands before and all that sort of stuff, which applies everywhere. That's become a bit of an extra layer over some of this stuff.
Making sure that we're cleaning it semi-regularly too, so it's,
And always, if you're going to share fruit or veggies, make sure you wash them before eating them, that sort of thing. But you should be doing that anyway.
But if you are swapping food with people who you can have a conversation with, and you can ask them how they've grown it, and if they've used any pesticides or anything like that. Yeah, it's all about conversations.
If you make sourdough bread, share your sourdough starter, and build these little communities of bakers, and it'd be awesome.
That's right. Share those sourdough starters, share your scobies, all
Yeah.
those sort of things.
Yeah. They seem like tiny things, but collectively, all of these tiny actions that are supported by principles will add up to a huge positive impact. And you know, we've seen shows like The War on Waste have start to get into that having a broad impact. And I think we just need to find alternative ways to keep often selling the same kind of messages around reducing waste. Sometimes we have to badge them in different ways to get more people on board, so that we can convey the idea that waste-free living is easy, fun, doable for most people, and for those that it's not, we can find ways to support them. Let's help. Yeah,
absolutely. I'll just finish with Costa's got a recommendation about checking out Grow It Local, and there is also Grow Free. So lots of resources out there, and if people are keen to find out more, there are our Zero Waste group. So Zero Waste Victoria, our Facebook group has over, I think, 12,000 people now. So lots of people to tap into if you need to, you know, check out any resources. If you're looking for something a bit more local, there's definitely people that'd be willing to jump on and help out. And same as Zero Waste Tasmania, and wherever you are, wherever you're zooming in from. So
there's lots of Zero Waste groups. They're everywhere now. I helped set up the Zero Waste Sydney, Zero Waste Blue Mountains. I think there's a Zero Waste Newcastle. They're in every state in Australia, state and territory, I think. So,
which is really exciting. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. Lauren and Oberon, thank you so much for sharing. We love your avoid waste where possible as a principle. I'm sure a lot of people will probably be going, okay, I'm just going to borrow that one. Start myself off with that principle to help guide choices into making life a lot easier, because it can become overwhelming when you're trying to do everything, trying to meet everything, or trying to do all the hacks. So on behalf of our community, a big thank you for your wonderful talk today. I'm sure people have taken a lot from it. And also the buy-in with getting your family on board, the whole authorship as ownership, you know, having those conversations, getting that understanding together. So you're all on the same page. Such important work there. So everyone, hopefully you're going to go beyond those Pinterest hacks and find your guiding principles on your way forward.